I couldn't believe it. I had finally found my twin, my chonky twin. Having finished our wonderful 6-day holiday in Tokyo and Kyoto, my wife and now prepared for our departure from Tokyo to Hokkaido, the winter wonderland. My wife and I took a train from Ueno to the airport, and as soon as we arrived in the airport, we had some food and we also bought some omiyage, some gifts for our neighbours and for the parents. And as soon as we boarded the plane, my wife fell asleep pretty much straight away, and me being me, I was too busy being glued to the window looking at the Tokyo cityscape. The flight to Obihiro, Hokkaido is only around an hour and a half, and so whilst the time was relatively short, it actually seemed longer than I expected. Having crossed the Sea of Japan, the blue horizon shifted into fields of pure white and eventually into a patchwork consisting of snow-covered fields with lines of trees called bufuro. These trees act as a windbreaker for the crops planted by farmers in spring. After landing in Obihiro Airport, my wife and I collected our luggage, and then we waited in the front lounge. Now, by this point, I'd not actually met my mother-in-law before face to face. I'd only actually communicated with both her and her boyfriend through a famous Japanese app called Line. And so, as soon as I met her, whilst generally speaking, Japanese people, it's not customary to give a hug. I gave her a hug and a peck on the cheek in Welsh fashion, and it was nice to meet her finally. The moment we exited the door of the airport, it was quite surprising. Tokyo was cold, however, Hokkaido received Siberian winds and it was cold on a whole nother level. Fortunately, this time I was actually wearing dress pants, a dress shirt and a jumper, and so I was safe in that regards. I remember walking through the snow-filled airport car park trying to pull my luggage along, and once we got to my mother-in-law's boyfriend's car, we loaded her up, and the first destination was the famous Manchester and homemaking shop called Nitori. Being the fussy git that I am, I needed to go to the shop to buy a pillow, as this would be the first night that I would be sleeping on a Japanese futon. That is basically a mattress that lays on the floor. After buying my pillow and seeing everything I wanted to in the store, I waited outside and basked in the completely different environment. There was snow everywhere, it was absolutely freezing, and there was even piles of snow that were piled up so high they were taller than me. For once, I was actually starting to feel a bit chilly, but being me, I really enjoyed it. After picking up the things we needed, it was now time to make our 30-minute journey home, and I was fortunate in that I was able to sit in the front seat while my mother-in-law and wife sat in the back seat, and so I was able to see all of the wintry landscape, which completely reminded me of 10 years prior where I'd actually visited Lucerne and went up Mount Pilatus in Switzerland. The whole environment was absolutely caked in snow and I loved it. Having lived in Australia for 16 years, there are only a handful of places that I could have and never did experience snow, which is crazy, as in my heart, snowy landscapes would be considered my favourite. We eventually arrived at my mother-in-law's house and what would be our home for the next 5 months. My mother-in-law had only recently purchased the house the year before, and whilst I can't give a specific price, I've come across many houses that are sometimes a third or even a fifth of the asking price for a house on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. Considering the beauty of this house and the surrounding area, if one has the opportunity, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Granted, the Japanese wage is lower, but if you have the opportunity to work your international job from within Japan, you'd be laughing. Inside my mother-in-law's house was someone very special that I'd been waiting to meet for such a long time. I finally got to meet my wife's cat, Nyan. What's funny is that Nyan is onomatopoeia for what English speakers would say meow. My wife found Nyan roaming the school grounds as a kitten and took her to the vet to ensure Nyan's wellness, and also put up posters to see if anyone had lost her. Fortunately for my wife and the cat, no one came forward, and like many spoilt house cats, this one had now become a princess. I've not always been a massive fan of cats, I've always preferred dogs, but after spending so many months with Nyan, she's finally brought me around. Not to say that I prefer cats to dogs now, but she's definitely brought me around, and it was great to finally meet my twin, considering how chonky she was. She's chonky just like me, and my wife will kill me for saying that. Prior to arriving, and as I mentioned in my first video, I'd actually pre-ordered some things to be sent to my mother-in-law's house before before we arrived, and so I received some PC parts and some desk parts, and I also had a limited edition Uniqlo box that had about 16 Final Fantasy shirts in. I will have to make another video for that one because it goes outside of the scope of this video. I also pre-arranged a parcel to be sent to my house from my mentor, Frank Lopacki, who is actually the composer for the Command & Conquer games. Inside the package was a signed CD and a t-shirt. If you also were a fan of Command & Conquer, I highly recommend that you jump onto his Patreon and sign up and watch his making of the video game soundtracks. 1 year prior to arriving in Japan, I had a car accident where someone drove into me and my car was a write-off, and I've not had a car since then. I spent the rest of the year on a push bike and I really miss my RAV4. However, now that I'd arrived in Japan, I now needed some new wheels, and so I decided to purchase an electric assisted bike. The bike has helped me commute back and forth to the gym and also to the local grocery shop in Ikeda. Once my bike arrived, I decided to take it on an hour's ride north of the house and visited a random village. Interestingly, that same day, without prior communication, my mother-in-law and her boyfriend had the day off and drove to the same village, and we bumped into one another. They offered me lunch at a small shop run by an older man and his wife, and I was blown away by the portion of the curry they served and for the price. Fortunately for me, Dai-san, my mother-in-law's boyfriend, paid for the meal. What a lucky guy. After finishing my meal, I jumped back on my bike for an hour's ride back home, but unfortunately halfway, my fat ass ended up making the saddle actually collapse, and it ended up going like this, and so I had to try and improvise the whole way back. Initially, I tried to find a stone on the side of the road to put under it so it would keep it steady. This didn't work, and so I had about half an hour's ride trying to get back with the seat just going like this. I tried to stand up and cycle home. However, at this point I was really unfit, and so that was very hard to do. In hindsight, this wasn't very safe, but I ended up actually taking my helmet off and putting it over the seat, and I sat on my helmet whilst it was on the seat, which managed to keep the saddle stable. Fortunately, I managed to make it back home just before it got dark, otherwise I would have been frozen. Having been in the country for a month, my wife, my mother-in-law and Dai-san ended up going to our welcoming party. The party was hosted by my mother-in-law's friends, the Kuboderas. Mr. Kubodera is a mechanic, but he is also a monk and has his own temple. Mrs. Kubodera is a ex-colleague of my mother-in-law's and is a teacher. The party consisted of a nomi hodai and a taba hodai, basically an all-you-can-drink and an all-you-can-eat, and it was fantastic. But by the end of the night, I was absolutely trolleyed, and unfortunately this had a massive knock-on effect for the next week, as the next week I felt absolutely terrible. As March turned into April, I felt like I'd finally become a part of the family. You're probably thinking, how do I know, or what metric did I use to try and determine this? Well, at this point, Nyan had finally jumped into my lap, and whilst I was suffering and dying because of my cat allergies, I was giving her affection back by giving her a nice little pat. Having settled a bit into my new home, my next video will showcase my further assimilation into Japanese culture. Topics will include the arrival of spring, barbecues, baking from seasonal ingredients, and also finally meeting up with some gaijin lads. If you enjoyed this video, please hit a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.